And here I thought the Francesca Bridgerton book discourse was going to be the most contentious thing I'd be wading into for the time being.
I want to see you again.
Now you see me.
You know what I mean.
Jeez. Scared the bejesus out of me.
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and on my channel I'd like to talk about entertainment media. Purely by way of pop culture osmosis and internet osmosis, I have heard of Colleen Hoover, but up until now I have never felt any type of inclination to read one of her books. I've had plenty of videos end up on my YouTube homepage of various creatives making scathing video reviews of her works, but the only thing that has happened to get my attention in terms of my own video creation is a film adaptation. I first and foremost focus on films on my channel, with some dabbling into television depending on what's being released and when. I actually thought that I would end up doing this video a lot sooner. There were some discussions behind the scenes about me potentially trying to be more hands-on with my coverage back when the film was supposed to have an earlier release date than where we find ourselves today. The timing worked out well enough though, because I am fresh off of doing a very in-depth video essay about the adaptation of Francesca Bridgerton's book, When He Was Wicked, which is the sixth book of the Bridgerton series, so I'm still very much in the headspace to talk about the adaptation process from print to screen. I also recently posted a review of M. Night Shyamalan's Trap, which was so much fun to watch, so make sure that you watch that review if you haven't already for my feedback on the ultimate gaslight gatekeep girl dad cinematic banger of the summer. My main inspiration for doing a video about It Ends With Us came from the thought exercise of putting myself in the mindset of what it would be like to get hired to work on the adaptation of a book like this. We've seen it happen time and time again where industry higher-ups with hiring power will rush to greenlight the adaptation of a profitable IP. It doesn't make a difference to these people if there are naysayers about the story, the relationship dynamics, and so on and so forth. It's like clockwork at this point. Twilight, Hunger Games, 50 Shades of Grey, 365 Days, whether a book is considered by many to be good or bad in quality, if it sells well, it will get made into a film. So what happens if you are the one that is hired to try to do that job to the best of your ability, and to what extent would you aim to modify things to make it better suited to a different medium of storytelling, as well as make it more palatable to the wider viewing audience? Because keep in mind, even with books that have sold very well, the movie-going audience will be full of people that have never read the book or books being adapted. It doesn't mean that you're not going to take book fans into consideration, but the adaptation has to be able to stand on its own merits to viewers regardless of whether or not they're familiar with the source material. And that is what I would like to discuss today as a sort of warm-up to actually going and seeing the film when it's released in cinemas. But before we do that, I want to remind everyone that, as always, there are donation links in my description box for Palestine, plenty to choose from, whether it's animal shelters, eSIMs, funds for children, feminine hygiene products. Just feel free to browse and donate wherever you can. To start things off, let me go through the basic premise of It Ends With Us. A fair bit of this I could sort of piece together simply by watching the film's trailer, but now that I've read the book, I can speak from that perspective as well. I'm not going to be fully thorough in recapping the story because that's not what I'm interested in focusing on for this video, and I'm assuming at this point that there has been more than enough controversy about this author that the people who want a detailed impression of the story have either 1, already read the book themselves, or 2, they've watched plenty of other video reviews that are more thorough in going over the material. So we have our protagonist, Lily Bloom, who is played by Blake Lively in the film adaptation. She begins dating and eventually marries a man named Ryle, who is a neurosurgeon. They have an escalating series of violent encounters. The violence is coming from him, and she has to eventually reach that point of deciding to divorce him because she gets pregnant and realizes that she doesn't want to raise their daughter in a DV household. Further context is that Lily herself grew up in a DV household. Her father was absolutely horrific in his treatment of Lily's mother. The beginning of the book takes place right after her father's funeral, at which she had been instructed by her mother to go up and say something nice about him to the people in attendance. And when she got up there, she said nothing. Silence. Exactly. So true of her. Furthermore, her first love, and if I may be so bold, true love, is a boy or man named Atlas. And the word describing him changes depending on which part of the story you're at. By way of her journal entries, the reader gets these flashbacks during which you learn about the horrors of Lily's childhood because of her father, but you also learn about how she came to know and fall in love with a boy named Atlas. Atlas was a boy who went to the same school as her. He is 2 years older. He also had a bad home life and was kicked out. He became homeless and started staying in the empty house that was right next to Lily's. She started giving him things like clothes and blankets and an ongoing offer to sneak him into her house to get a shower when her parents aren't home because she's a good person with a kind heart, and they begin hanging out with one another and ultimately they fall in love. Now we fast forward and Lily meets Atlas again as an adult. There has been a lot of groundwork laid in these flashbacks to make it evident that these two are going to be together again, that they've never stopped loving one another, and the only reason they didn't stay together is because Atlas had to move away to Boston because that was the only place where there was a relative willing to take him in as a homeless teen, and he wanted to build a life for himself that was better, a good life. Therefore, he would be able to see himself as worthy and having something to offer to Lily. After the worst, most violent encounter with Ryle, Atlas is the one Lily calls for help. He takes her to the hospital, and after she divorces Ryle and they're just co-parenting their daughter, she and Atlas are reunited and agree that they're both ready to finally be together once again, romantically. So to remind all of you, this video is nothing more than a creative exercise I'm doing publicly on the internet. I am not sharing ideas about adapting the material from book to screen with the mentality that if the adaptation doesn't do these things exactly as I said them, that I'm going to deduct points from how I rate the film. Depending on the response to this video though, we can do another video where I actually review the film and how it was adapted. It most likely won't be my next video that I post though, because there's something else that I should probably be reviewing first that I'm really excited about, but you're just going to have to stay tuned if you would like to know what that is. I ended up jotting down 6 ideas for adapting It Ends With Us. Some are very specific and some are more broad, and I am not presenting these ideas in any particular order. So idea number 1 is fix the pacing. Now, don't come for me if you're a diehard book fan. This is specific to the differences in how you convey information in print versus how you do that on screen. When you want a reader to know something, you can just write that information down. If a character is thinking through a decision and going on this whole contemplative, reflective arc within their own mind that leads to an important decision that they make, if you directly put that into live action, what you're going to see is a character just sitting or standing, and that really doesn't make for a compelling watch. And when I was going through the plot of It Ends With Us and trying to envision playing that on screen, it felt very meandering. It didn't feel like there was a strong enough sense of direction for a first-time viewer who will have not read the book and wouldn't be able to inherently know where the story is going. The pacing would need to be modified to move a bit faster than how things unfold and develop in this book. You would need to do this in a couple of ways. One way is to more quickly and clearly establish the sense of urgency that Lily needs to get the hell out of this relationship with Ryle, as well as more clearly implant this feeling of longing into the viewer, where they can really feel the depth and magnitude of the love between Lily and Atlas and how that's finally going to be able to happen for them as adults. If you've read the book in its entirety and you like the book, you will understand all of that material, but when you put the story on film, there are certain things you need to make clear sooner rather than later. Idea number 2, the order of events. In the book, you experience Lily meeting Ryle first. You are establishing this connection they're supposed to have between them. Personally, I found him very gross and pushy in an off-putting way from the very beginning, but Lily seems to like him. Whatever. Gross. A movie-going audience, whether they are aware of this or not, they are accustomed to a certain cinematic language, and I think it's important that you introduced Lily first on her own as the protagonist of the story, so that the viewer is first and foremost connecting to her and understanding that this is the person that you are following, this is who you're invested in, and this is who you will be rooting for. And following this, I would also have some sort of flashback to Atlas before you see Lily meet Ryle. Because in looking at the book story in its entirety, Atlas's presence is lingering and profound. He's always with Lily, even if they're not actually physically with each other, but you don't fully understand that until the book tells you. She's been holding on to Atlas this entire time. He's in her journals. The magnet that he gave her a decade ago is still on her fridge. She has a tattoo on her collarbone in the spot where he would always kiss her, and the tattoo is of a heart in the design of a wood carving that he had gifted her. So you really need to establish to the audience that this is her true love. If you introduce Ryle first, you're potentially setting up a movie-going audience to imprint on that pairing first, and then you're going to needlessly jumble them up when they discover, oh, this man is actually horrible. She should be with Atlas instead. Also, Ryle gets violent with Lily more than once, specifically over his jealousy of Atlas, so you need to establish to the audience how deeply embedded Lily's love story with Atlas is in both her past and present. Idea number 3, be extremely selective and strategic about how you present the DV on screen. There is a lot of violence in the book. I did not enjoy reading it, though to be fair, you're not supposed to enjoy reading that because it's DV, but reading something in print versus seeing actors act that out in live action is not the same thing. If the DV doesn't need to be fully seen to make the point, then I wouldn't show all of it directly. You can establish that DV is ongoing without having to show the full view of what happens every single time. You can show the lead up to a violent event and then the aftermath where you just see what someone's physical injuries are. In the case of Lily as a teenager being in her childhood home and her father is the one doing DV to Lily's mother, depending on which incident from the story it is, you could keep it in such a way where the camera stays on teenage Lily and then you only hear the actors playing her parents acting out the encounter without having to actually show all of that on camera. When you're portraying DV on screen, depending on how you choose to frame and choreograph it, you are potentially asking actors to physically interact with each other in a particular way, and it's incredibly taxing emotionally and psychologically to also have to inhabit that space to be able to emote that material in a believable way. I don't actually find it ethical to demand that actors play this type of material more than you need to for the story. Another thing you need to remember is that even just a few minutes of screen time, that's going to be something put together from numerous takes, hours of filming, getting shots from different angles. So ultimately, I don't think you need more than a few seconds of a direct view of the DV for Lily's parents in these violent encounters that you're going to include in the screenplay. This is also simply down to my personal taste as a viewer. I don't want to watch more DV than I have to. I would rather watch little to no DV ever, especially the way that it was written in the book. Some of the scenes make more sense to actually act out in full in a very direct way, but some of the other scenes I don't think you need to be as direct to still make your point to the audience. I don't think you need to see Lily's mother being repeatedly attacked to the degree that she is in the book and have an actress playing that. I think you can make the exact same point to the audience by keeping the camera on teenage Lily while she is a witness to what's happening, instead of giving a bunch of runtime to the camera showing all of that violence on screen. Number 4, this might be a seemingly inconsequential change, but it could also be a controversial one for me to suggest for some of the book purists. Remove the Ellen DeGeneres in the room.
Not a joke, just a fact.
Lily's journal entries have this framing device where each journal entry from her teenage flashbacks is her writing to Ellen DeGeneres because she watches her show and has a parasocial perception of her. She never actually sends them. It's just how she writes her journals. Lily and Atlas would also hang out as teenagers at her house and they would watch Ellen DeGeneres' talk show together. Now, first of all, having to pay the licensing fees to use the show or maybe even to be able to mention it, that feels like a waste of what I would presume is a modest production budget. That money would be better spent on any number of other things. Fancier lighting, more memorable costumes, building more elaborate sets. You have options. The other point, though, is that it's a very weird thing to the casual movie-going audience that doesn't know that this is a framing device in the book to repeatedly reference a woman who was canceled for having an allegedly hostile, toxic, if not downright abusive work environment, and have that woman be this parasocial fairy godmother figure in your abuse story. I can tell you for a fact that if I had not read the book and showed up to the cinema to watch this, and Lily had kept talking about Ellen DeGeneres and referencing her show, and there was never any attempt to address the fact that she needs to let go of that show the way she needs to let go of her scumbag husband, I would be confused as a viewer. Now, I am open to keeping the Finding Nemo reference if it's not going to be too problematic for the budget. I would prioritize having that instead of putting so much focus on Ellen DeGeneres in a more direct way and her show. Idea number 5, be more direct in conveying that alcohol plays a role in Riles' DV towards Lily. When I finished reading the book, there was a note from the author section in which it was explained that the author modeled Lily and Riles' relationship after her own mother and father, and more specifically that her father was an alcoholic. Upon learning that, I was a bit frustrated that the book was not more clear in emphasizing alcohol as being part of the problem. The book talks about how Ryle is traumatized because when he was 6 years old, he accidentally killed his brother. He didn't know what he was holding in his hands was real. He thought he was holding a toy, but it wasn't a toy. So when he shot that thing, that was it. So they do this weird back and forth with Riles' behavior that didn't really work for me in how I was processing the story. But once I read this note and it said he was modeled after an alcoholic, that was when I could start to better understand what the story and characterization was going for. They did make a mention in the book before one of Riles' violent assaults that he's been drinking and that he will sometimes drink to help himself go to sleep. But overall, there just wasn't enough there in the story to make me understand that he was being characterized as being modeled after an alcoholic. If they had been more direct about portraying him as an alcoholic, I would have had an easier time understanding the dichotomy of how he's portrayed. The ending also didn't really make sense to me of Lily being so open to doing this co-parenting situation with him. But if you had more clearly established him as an alcoholic, and then at the end he is going to start going to meetings and he's taking all the necessary steps for sobriety, the ending would have landed better for me as a reader. When I finished the story and hadn't read that author's note yet, I was of the belief that this man should be nowhere near a baby, especially unsupervised. So, for a feature film, I would definitely make the alcoholism more clear and present in Riles' story arc and characterization. And finally, idea number 6, I would change the aspect ratio for the flashbacks to Lily's teenage scenes. Now, I don't know what sort of aspect ratio the present day material would be. I didn't think that far into it, but I did get this idea in my head to change the flashback stuff to 4:3. I will admit that I'm a sucker for a good aspect ratio switch up. This is something you might be more likely to see happen in a music video, but I really like the idea of switching to 4:3 for Lily's flashbacks for a couple of reasons, beyond just the fact that I like seeing an aspect ratio switch up. For one, a 4:3 aspect ratio is more square-like in its dimension than the array of widescreen aspect ratios you'll usually see for feature films, and 4:3 is the aspect ratio of older television models. That's why if you're watching old episodes or clips from television series released from the 1980s or 1990s, you will see these black bars on the sides on modern devices. It's something that a lot of viewers would just understand without thinking about it in overly technical details. But not only does a 4:3 aspect ratio create a vintage look aesthetically, when I think about how Lily and Atlas are basically the only good things in each other's lives at that age, they're surrounded by horrors that no one should ever have to experience, especially young teenagers. I really like the idea that if you put the two of them in a 4:3 shot, if you frame them correctly, you wouldn't really see a lot of their surroundings. I wouldn't have as much of a view of these horrible houses they're trapped in and all the bad things that happen inside those houses. With these shots, you as a viewer would really only be focusing on the two of them, and it would feel more intimate because you're in this tiny world that they're basically creating for themselves, where they're able to find solace in one another. But if you want my thoughts on the film itself, you're just going to have to let me know in the comments, and we can circle back in a week or so once the film has been released in cinemas.
Is that your guy?
Yeah, that's Ryle.
Demon! I will kill you as many times as I have to.